Hi, my name is Ed Riley. I'm State Senator for Central Anne Arundel County. To set up a powerhouse at one high school is very impressive. To do it in a state like Maryland is even more impressive. To set up two programs like Coach Heffler did at a school in the River Road to Riva Road corridor is truly remarkable.
Well, I did watch the wrestling, the football, the baseball. I think those were the main ones he coached. He was his own being, and he had it going, and if he needed advice, it wasn't coming from somebody soft like me. Over the years, I've been surprised to the number of students, athletes, just regular students in his classes that have come back and thanked him for the lessons that he gave them, the motivation that they drew from his lessons in all walks of life, and they in different areas, not just the sports, or it was intellectual, emotional. Well, he's primarily a motivational person. He himself was motivated by a challenge. Say no, he couldn't do something, and by golly, he was going to do it. And he got through life that way. There were things that happened that he had to overcome. He had a lot of energy, he had natural talent, but there were a lot of things that he had to overcome, and he made sure it got done, and that's why the way he coached the way he did. He learned his lessons from things that were hard for him to do. I don't know if that was a surprise. They certainly, I think that's pretty typical in the coaching arena, in the sports. Frequently, the boys that are interested in or are interested in those things. But yes, they were a large number that apparently had good experiences and wanted to do the same kind of thing. Double session. I had virtually no idea about any of the football. It was funny in the fact that we didn't know each other real long before we got married. And he was very persistent, and okay, so we got married, and he was like so attentive, and then we got married, and then we got married in August, the beginning of August, and the first thing I knew, football was upon us, and I was pretty much single again for a long time. I think he enjoyed everything when he worked with the kids. He loved working with the kids. Double sessions were the beginning of a new season, a new beginning, meeting more kids and helping further those that he already knew. I don't know that it was a lot different than any of the other times that he was coaching or teaching. He was always very involved, very enthusiastic. But I could never call anything that he did just another day. No, Frank pretty much knew exactly what to expect. He had been, he had seen through the years what it was. He knew what to expect. And it was like, okay, this is what we have to do. I know what I'm going to, and I do it. And so it wasn't a change. It was just part of our lifestyle. I think so. I think he also learned to persevere. He also learned to the mental toughness. But I don't know if there was any big changes. Again, probably strengthened in those years because he spent so much time, Bud spent so much time with with students and teaching. And so being his coach really strengthened those things, I think, as opposed to being father. There were so many students that came back from all walks of life that were inspired, that were motivated, appreciated, and they'd come back after they had met a challenge or got through certain phases in their life, and they'd come back, and it always surprised me that Bud was in the back of their heads at some of these pivotal moments.
Let me tell you something. High school was special. We were young, we were stupid, we ate pizza omelets at Denny's at 3 in the morning. But I do believe that there was nothing cooler in our lives that any of us went to than when we were playing football for Buddy Heffer and we would go through the red set drills and the pregame uniform. And I now realize later the reason was because we were with champions such as Mike Lyons, John Hesterman, and Sean Logan, and Buddy Heffer would treat us the exact same as he would treat the champions among us, no matter whether you started or not. So, my friends, not all heroes wear capes. Some wear gray t-shirts with green shorts and carry packs of red men with them. So it's time to hear now from a general, a doctor, and a lawyer how they owe so much of their success in life to the man we call Coach. General Hesterman, when did you first hear about Buddy Heffer?
Coach Heffer was legend long before I got here, but when I was in 7th grade, I had the good fortune to have a sister that was a year ahead of me, so mostly I had to keep my mouth shut and enjoyed her popularity. But I had heard about Coach Heffer. I was at the game where Dr. Lyons grabbed that fumble and ran it in for the state championship, and we used to drive by and see double sessions and think, my God, that looks hard. So, I certainly knew who he was, well before I got here. We got to admire him from a little bit afar as JV players, and then I had the good fortune to play for him for a couple of years.
Did the double sessions prove to be as hard as you thought they were driving by?
I think later in my life when I was doing anything hard, much like Sean has alluded to, I remembered back when I thought that I was going to die every day and still managed to get to the end of the practice, just like Coach knew that I would. Let me talk just a second about the impact that he made on me. And I think I told this story at Coach's retirement, but when a fighter pilot goes into combat, he fills out a sheet for the rescue forces that has a couple of things on it. One of those things is a challenge question that only that pilot should be able to know the answer to. And this is so the rescue forces are sure that the guy that they're picking up behind enemy lines is in fact the right guy. The other thing that's interesting about that question is it has to be something that you remember no matter how much duress, how much stress, how much, how beat up that you are. And I remember not hesitating. I wrote, "Here's the best football coach I ever knew, Buddy Heffer," and handed that in. And just to give you a frame of reference from the 43 years since I wandered off the football field here. I've been very fortunate. I was coached in college by Olympic and world team coaches. In the military, I was the good fortune to be led by and then later to lead the most capable military men and women on the planet. More recently, I've spent a lot of time with professional alpine and polar guides that have inspired teams to get to the tops of all the world's highest mountains and to get to the both North and South Pole on foot. And out of all those world-class leaders, I've never met anybody that had the ability to make people believe in what they were doing and in themselves better than Buddy.
Well, he's primarily a motivational person.
I lived in Crofton. My father was in the Army, so I moved around a bit. But I lived in Crofton 6th, 7th grade, then 8th grade. Then I moved to Germany for 2 years, for first 2 years of high school, 9th and 10th. Small high school, about 200 kids in it, and everyone talked about going back to the States because we're in the military, you rotate through duty assignments, and high school kids all talked about going back and playing sports in their high schools, and I knew that I'd be coming back to Arundel. But I really had no impression prior to that, because I left early, of what type of storm and madman I was heading into. And so August 15th showed up, and I remember there's that hill that goes up to the locker room after the practice. And I remember walking up that hill, and if I stood, you just wear helmets, first of all, to practice. And if I stood up, everything would turn black from the outside and start closing in. So I'd bend over on my knees. And then everything would open up again. And so I walked all the way up the hill like that, knowing I couldn't stand up. I walked into the locker room, went into the shower, sat down on the floor, turned the water on, and sat there for the entire hour and a half. And all the other juniors, the seniors who knew the program, they were all out buying subs and things and doing the things they do between sessions. But I stood there the whole time and got up, went down, did the second session. The next morning I couldn't get out of bed. I was so sore, but I did anyway because he expected me to. But that's when I met him, right when I showed up for the first time.
When did you first hear about double sessions? Did anyone ever tell you what it would be about, or did you realize as you were in the shower?
Well, I mean, I knew I was coming in that morning for it, but pretty much when I was in the shower, I realized what double sessions meant sitting on the floor.
Double sessions. I had virtually no idea about any of the football. You know, it was funny in the fact that he, we didn't know each other real long before we got married. And he was very persistent, and okay, so we got married, and he was like so attentive, and then, you know, we got married, and then the first thing, we got married in August, the beginning of August, and the first thing I knew, football was upon us, and I was pretty much single again for a long time.
Same thing. It was around the first week of football practice. My brother and I, we showed up. We didn't have any expectation, just we wanted to play football at Arundel High School. And this guy comes out in these tight green shorts. He has this whistle, and he has this look that, you know, he's not to be messed with.
Don't forget this.
And he chewed tobacco, that's right. And I just remember looking at him thinking, this is going to be tough. And it was. It was real tough. But that was my first time I had met Coach Hefner, and yeah, I had not heard anything about him up until that point. But I really got to know him during wrestling season. And again, those tight green shorts, the whistle, and you know, the way he looked, his presence.
Well, what I felt was interesting when I was prepping everyone for today's show, I asked Coach Heffer, you know, I said, did your sons ever talk about double sessions? And he said, no, we never talked about double sessions at our house. And I thought, Coach, that's all we talked about when we were. John, do you remember what it was like when you were talking about others with double sessions? And you said you thought you were going to die. I mean, were you able to share that with, you know, sympathetic 15-year-olds? Did they understand?
You know, I think for me anyway, and I didn't realize this like most of us until years later, but at the time it was just hard. Years later, it became a lot more, and it wasn't, for me at least, it wasn't so much the double sessions. I mean, I think there are a lot of schools that actually practice twice a day. But there's a difference between practicing twice a day and being coached by Buddy Heffern.
Yeah.
And the thing that, I mentioned that he was the most effective leader that I've ever known. And the reason that I say that is because he so fundamentally believed that if we did what he taught us to do, that we'd be successful, that we believed him too. And his ability to make us know how he felt about that. And by the way, he treated all of us the same. If Buddy Heffer ever had a favorite, I still to this day have no idea who it was. But what he did is he fully expected us to do what he told us to do. And consequently, I think it birthed in probably all of us, certainly in me, this deep desire not to disappoint. And, later in my life, it became obvious to me that every great leader that I knew had that sort of intangible ability to get his subordinates or his team or the people around him to not want to disappoint him, mostly because it so quickly becomes then about not wanting to disappoint each other. Sean and I played right next to each other on the offensive line. I'll tell you more about that story for a second. But
Towering offensive guard. It's just massive.
Well, and again, this is Buddy Heffern. I was almost 5'7" in my cleats. I weighed a good 150 pounds after the first week of double sessions, and I walked up, and because I think Tony Tate was going to play the position that I used to play, I said, "Coach, can I be a guard?" Because Kevin Carlin had graduated, and Coach has had world-class athletes. He's had Sam Johnson and Mike Lyons and Neil Herrick and a lot of and others, Rod Hubbard and Mike Moore, that were phenomenal. But mostly he had guys like me, a little bit undersized. We were okay athletes, but he kind of looked at me when I said, "Can I play guard?" And again, it was the only position on the team that everybody graduated, so that's the reason I asked. And he kind of looked at me and he said, "I'll think about it." And a couple minutes later, he said, "Get over there, you can try." And I promptly got the crap kicked out of me by guys that were Sean's size. And but he made me believe that if I did what he told me, that I would be successful. And he fully expected me for the rest of that year. The guys standing in front of me were often 7 inches taller. They probably weighed 70 or 80 pounds more than I did. And he fully expected me to block that guy. And I learned how to do that. And eventually, I believed that I could. And I certainly knew that he could, the guy next to me. And, the power of that was pretty phenomenal. And by the way, I need to publicly thank Sean Logan at this point, because the number of times that he stepped in between me and a guy that was a lot bigger than me, that was justifiably irritated because I might have accidentally grabbed his jersey or might have accidentally done a judo technique that took him to the ground, was way more than once. So, brother, thank you very much for saving me from grievous bodily harm.
Now, Sean, were you stepping in to warn the other guy that John was the national judo champion and one of only 10 in the United States with a black belt as a teenager?
That's a good point. I think in the humble story, which is accurate in almost every point, Buddy probably knew that you were a national judo champion and knew a little bit about balance and things, so that might probably help being a guard.
So, Sean, when was it in the Marine Corps or the Naval Academy that you first realized what a leader Buddy Heffer was and the impact it had on you?
It's an interesting question. I remember talking with my father while I was at the Naval Academy, and
he was career Army.
He was retired Army, yes. And I made the part of the conversation. I said I somehow learned along the way I learned this, that I can start on any team I go to. And that, if you could ever want your son or daughter to learn a life lesson, it's how to recognize what you need to do it, and to succeed to the level that you can start on any team, whether that's in a business or that's in a military unit or that's on any sports team that you're in. And I thought later, where did I learn that? How did I come across that? And it absolutely was, the years I spent playing football here, where I was told how to do it. I was expected to do the best I could on every play, and it was pounded into us for every practice. Do your job. Do your assignment. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do everything else. Just do what you need to do, what you're supposed to do, and if you do that right every time, then you're going to be doing your job properly. And I often tell this story that and maybe you guys remember this, but I don't ever really recall Coach Heffer talking about winning. There was never anything that we really brought up or he talked. He says, we're going to win this game. You have to win. It wasn't about winning. It was always about do what you need to do to the very best of your ability. The winning will take care of itself, and it did. We won a lot of games. But that lesson of learning to recognize what I can do, to do the best that I can do, and the second part of that was if you do the best you can do, your job to perfection as far as you can do it, and you don't win, you still walk off the field with your head held high and your chin in the air and your chest out because you did everything that you could possibly do and be prepared for. And I learned that here.
Dr. Lyons, did you learn that as a wrestler from Coach Heffer?
Let me kind of piggyback on what you were saying. When I reflect back when I played football for Coach, the one thing that he kind of instilled in all of the players that, to me, failure was not an option, that you had to buy into his system. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it. If you bought into his system, all the pieces would fall in place. He had this thing where, you had to give more than 100%. It's like give 110% because we all give 100%. And when I look back on it, I think that's the big takeaway I get from those times we were doing two-a-days. It got to a point where 2 days wasn't an issue. It was fun to be with the guys that you played with, because he instilled that team philosophy. We're a team. We're in it together. We're gonna die together. And so going to practice every day, doing the 2-a-days, hanging out with the guys, hanging up under the tree. You have that tradition. And there's a guy out here. I just want to acknowledge Chuck Markowitz. I brought my son here in 2011 because he reminded me of Coach. Have the same philosophy.
How did he remind you of Coach Heffer?
He's no nonsense. He's about team. He's about discipline. And he continued the Arundel tradition. And so my son came and played with Coach Markowitz for 2 years. So he continued Coach's legacy after Coach had retired for many years at Arundel High School. So again, for me, like I said before, 2-a-days was an issue. It's what was learned under Coach. And then remember my time, it was Coach Mears. He was the head coach during that time.
Now, did your son compare and contrast double sessions under Coach Markowitz for you?
Oh,
Were they the same?
He thought he was going to die. He had a lot of names for Coach Markowitz, I cannot say, but he said Coach Markowitz was tough, and I used to say the same thing about my coach. So we shared those moments.
Now, you were the middle linebacker and then the nose tackle for the legendary Morgan State defenses of the late 70s. What were their practices like compared to double sessions?
Morgan practice was brutal because it was just physical. And so they taught technique, but we hit every day in practice. So if you were banged up, You were expected to get taped up, go see the trainer, and you had to be out there ready to play. If you didn't come to practice, there was someone behind you waiting to take your position. So a lot of guys would go out there. So it was much different, because I think back in high school, we were just learning to play as a team. And we didn't know whether we were good or not. But when you're at the college level and you play in Division I AA or Division I, everyone's a superstar. Everyone can hit. Everyone can run. So it's much different. It's more physical and it's faster. And you
Sean-
already know the concept about playing as a team.
Sean,
two
did you
quick
have the
points.
same experience playing?
Let me make two quick points
Certainly.
just for a second. One is it any surprise to anybody that two of our very adept assistant coaches, Chuck Markowitz and Jeff Herrick, are both Hall of Fame coaches in their own right?
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, second, almost without exception, the very toughest defensive line I ever played against was the Arundel High School second string, because they believed everything that Buddy Hefner said too. And they wanted to impress him. They didn't want to disappoint him, and they kicked the crap out of us. You know, we almost went to the games to rest. Not really. Don't get upset, Coach. But the guys that played in our second team, they wanted Coach to know that they were part of this team, and it was the hardest thing I did.
General Hessman, let me ask you a question about your leadership training. When I was talking to Coach Heffer to prepare for tonight, he said a player had to do three things to be successful. He said, number one, he had to buy into me as his coach first. And then he said, number two, he had to buy into the program that I had created. And then he said, number three, he had to buy into himself as a player. If he did that, he would be a winner. How would that happen with any of the leadership training you took in your military career?
Well, I think it made it easier to be in a world where I was playing on a high quality team, just like I had in high school. You know, the stakes were a little bit higher, and the reason that what made Coach Heffer special in my mind was, you know, lots of coaches say that they hold their players to a high standard. You know, Coach didn't actually really say that. He just did. And he so fundamentally believed that if we did what he told us, that we would meet that standard, that we believed it too. And that shaped the way that I thought about everything I did. When I flew in combat, I wasn't afraid of getting shot down, because I was so focused on doing all the things that I had learned how to do in order to make sure that the mission was successful. I learned that from him. Yeah. And, you know, and I tried to teach that and impart that and believe in the folks that later, you know, had to do it for me. And when they believe that you do, they always rise to that level and to that occasion. And nobody did that to this day in my life better than Buddy Hefner.
Yeah. So it's that old saying in education, you can't lead if nobody's following you. And so people have to respect who you are, right? You have to have high moral values. You have to be respectful of other people's opinion. And that's something I have learned from Coach. What's interesting is when I'm in a leadership capacity, I try not to influence my personal opinions or idea. As I sit here and I'm thinking about Coach, I don't remember him trying to persuade us or give us his personal feelings about something. He would just talk in terms of general topics or issue and ask you to perform at a certain level. And so that's what I expect from the people that I supervise.
And when you were pursuing your doctorate, did any of the lessons you learned from Coach Heffer in double session help you through that?
So the one thing,
Berkeley is a very unique institution.
so the one thing about Coach is he wants you to be tenacious. You know, you got to persevere. You got to see it through. The one thing he did not like is someone to quit. I mean, it bothered this guy if you quit. And so when I was working on my doctorate, unfortunately, I went through a divorce. And if you ever went through a divorce, that's the worst thing you can experience. And I had 2 children at the time. And so I had this professor, I had passed the comps, and I was working on my dissertation. And so this guy decides to go on sabbatical. And this was my 3rd year at Berkeley. So I called the dean up and said, hey, I can't afford to pay another year of tuition. My advisor's on sabbatical. And they said, it's too bad, you gotta wait till he gets back. So I had to wait a 4th year for him to come back. So he came back, I gave him the dissertation, and he says to me, go back and rewrite it. This is what he told me. So that summer, I thought I was gonna graduate. And he had me go back and revise that dissertation 4 or 5 times. So I didn't graduate that summer, and I was thinking about actually walking away from it. So September 10th, he told me to go back and revise it. Football game was on. I went, he was a professor at Berkeley, but he also did some work at Stanford. So he had me come to his house. I go to his house. He opens the door, and he said, come in, Dr. Lyons. I said, what? He said, come in, Dr. Lyons. I said, you're not going to look at the dissertation? He said, no. I said, how you know if I did the edits? He said, because I know you're disciplined. I know you're going to get it done. He never looked at the dissertation, had a beer, watched the game, and went home. I graduated that December. And again, and the reason I'm pointing this out, I was on the verge of quitting that doctoral program, but I kept hearing Coach Heffer in the back of my mind saying, you just can't do that. And I saw it through. So I'm going to start with wrestling. I'm going to go back. In '75, I was a fairly decent wrestler. And so in the wrestling room, there wasn't a lot of competition after Mike Finley left. Once Mike left, it was just, the competition wasn't there. So Coach Midas, I'm not sure if you guys remember Coach Midas. You know, I would work Coach Midas over, and I don't think Coach liked that. So. He decided he would wrestle with me. And so, you know, we go out there, we wrestle, and I messed up his knee, right? And so he had to, I think he had an operation on your knee or tore your ligaments. So the takeaway from that is John Fisher, who's here tonight, John Fisher, I think it was Mr. Tani, went over to his house. We got to see the father side, the husband. Very loving, very caring.
Weird.
The white picket fence, you know, and
Pink house.
The pink house. And I just remember what a contrast. The coach, the father, it was just remarkable to see him in that capacity. And so that was the takeaway. And again, it feeds back into leadership. Here's a coach. I think he was in his mid-30s during that time. He was willing to get out on the mat to make his player better. And then after that, shortly after that, I had told him that if I won a state tournament, I had wanted to wrestle at the University of Oklahoma because they had a good wrestling program. So I ended up taking second. He picked me up one night, took me to Morgan State, introduced me to the wrestling coach and the football coach. And they offered me a scholarship right there on the spot because of what he did. And at that point, I chose to go to Morgan State. I didn't think about any other offer at that point. So what I've done over the years, I've reached out to other students who may have come from a family that didn't have those kind of resources and try to do the same for those families as well. So those are my takeaways with the two-a-days and leadership.
The whole time and got up, went down to the second session,
The next morning I couldn't get out of bed, I was so sore, but I did anyway, because he expected me to. But that's when I met him, right when I showed up for the first time.
The reason I'm here is because I'd written a speech back in 1999 at Coach Heffer's retirement party. Felt it was something I was obligated to do. Fortunately, I decided to keep it. Took me a while to find it. I've moved a number of times and so on, but it was right where it's supposed to be. It was behind the thank you note that Coach Heffer mailed to me. So I'll start off here. At the present moment, I find myself in the same situation I was 21 years ago. Then I was a shy young man giving an ad hoc speech during the 1978 Football Awards banquet. At that time, we were coming off what was a successful yet ultimately disappointing season. At the banquet, the captains were asked to provide some insight into the life on the football field while under the tutelage of Coach Heffer. I remember rambling on about the sacrifices he and the others on the coaching staff made. But it wasn't until later in life that I began to appreciate his impact on my life and the others who played football, wrestled, or lifted weights under his guidance. Fortunately, I'm better prepared today, 1999, than I was then, and I certainly have Coach Heffer to thank. To start off, I'd like to share some firsts with you. I remember the first story I ever heard about the legendary Coach Heffer. It was about a fly that had landed on his leg. Disturbed by the fact that an insect was occupying space on his thigh, he quickly flexed his quad, instantly killing the bug. It was hard to imagine that I was so young and naive, and yes I was, that I actually believed the tale. I guess the halls of Arundel will always have its folklore. The first time I saw Coach Heffer at work, saw him in previous time, I'll tell you about that. I was barely 15 years old, and Joey Tomanovich had come to my house to take me to an Arundel wrestling match. I can still see Coach Heffer sitting in a folding chair, his leg in a brace propped up on another chair, barking out instructions like a madman, while the vein on his right side of his neck was ready to explode. The only other experience I found more menacing was later that evening when Mike Lyons, Dr. Lyons, pinned his opponent in 16 seconds flat. For a young athlete, that evening was a profound vision of two of Arundel's best competitors on display. Believe it or not, one of my first influences Coach Heffer had on me was to increase my vocabulary. I became accustomed to hearing phrases such as Katie bar the door, intestinal fortitude, alligator tears, and who could forget my good friend Mr. Dalton's favorite, huggy face, kissy poo. Coach Heffer was able to expand my vocabulary more than Mrs. Carpenter ever could. Thank you, Coach. The coach's first year as a head coach of the Arundel football team was, let's say, intense. It was made clear that we were not going to fail. I remember losing the friendly on the opening game, 35-0. Then coming back the next week and humiliating Brooklyn Park 39-0. The following Monday after the Brooklyn Park game was the hardest practice of my life. At that point, I certainly questioned whether or not I had enough intestinal fortitude to continue playing football at Arundel. Yet as the year progressed, we both were learning, and in Coach Heffer's case, he was learning how best to mold us into winners. And in my case, I figured out that hard work and sacrifices need to be made in order to attain your goals. It needs to be stated first and foremost that Coach Heffer was not just a coach, he was a teacher and ultimately an educator. He instilled in me a conviction that hard work and dedication are not just valuable traits, but necessary ones in today's society, more so today, too. When there were times that I couldn't find guidance from my own father, the hard work ethic that I attained through my formative years on the practice field has helped shepherd me through life's challenges. When times became tough, I just have to remember enduring double sessions in the August heat during my 3 years at Arundel. If I could survive that experience, I indeed could rise to any of life's expectations. So in closing, I would like to show my appreciation to Coach Heffer, the man who helped mold me into the person I am today. Thank you, Coach.